Hi, everyone. We are going to get started. I think we have a couple of other people in the process of joining, but they look like they should be good. So welcome to today's webinar. We're excited that you're here. Thanks for taking the time. We're covering profitability pitfalls to avoid today. And this is a new thing we're trying to do, which is a condensed version of advice and best practices from some experts in just 30 minutes or less. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me pull this in. So today's presenters, we're excited to have Josh Levy joining from Document Crunch, and then we have Ben Conry, obviously from Flashtract, and they're both co-founders of the companies. They've been through the construction ringer a bit, and they started companies to fix a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. So they're going to give us some great advice. So getting into the things that we're going to cover with pitfalls that you need to be avoiding as you try to scale, the three things that we've noticed and that the guys have come up with to present with you today are lack of bandwidth, contract complexities, and then lack of process. Those tend to be themes that we see really often as people try to go from one office to two or to multiples. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to have Ben start us off with lack of bandwidth. So Ben, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. Thanks for the introduction. Excited to be here today. Excited to be speaking with Josh from Document Crunch. So yeah, just like you said, as companies go to scale, we hear all the time kind of three major areas that they struggle with. One of those is bandwidth, the others being contract complexities and just a lack of process. And so from our customers, some of the areas that we see as kind of the biggest challenges when it comes to bandwidth is I think it's kind of two components. It's project management and operations, as well as the back office and administrative teams. So both of those departments or groups both struggle when it comes to bandwidth. So most of the companies that we're working with today say that their project management team is able to effectively manage somewhere around 5 to 10 million in project volume effectively. But what kind of one of the challenges they face is as their company starts to scale and as they take on bigger projects and more projects, their project managers are having difficulties flexing up, being able to manage more project volume. However, the teams that we've seen and talked to that have focused on, process improvement and brought in technology solutions have actually been able to increase that project volume that their team is able to manage. So for instance, there's a company that we're working with right now, and they were saying on average, a project manager could manage about 5 to 7 million. Once they put in place some technology and really focused on process improvement, they're managing roughly 15 million in project volume effectively. And the tools that they really focused on from a project management and operations standpoint were really centered around communication, document storage, and really trying to automate as many manual tasks for their project management and operations teams. They felt like in order to be able to effectively manage more volume, that they needed the ability to reduce a lot of that mundane kind of routine work that their operations teams were having to perform. So another strategy I've actually seen growing in popularity across the industry is the utilization of project administrators or project assistants. This is kind of a team of individuals that actually assist the project management team across multiple projects. They kind of handle some of the heavy administrative sides of a project. This is a great way to share some of the workload, allowing your project management team to more effectively manage more volume and offload some of those administrative tasks on someone that's more specifically focused on that every single day. But an area that I'm a little more familiar with and kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis is the bandwidth issues when it comes to the back office. So the teams that we work with here at Flashtract, traditionally perform a large amount of data entry across systems. They follow heavy, manual processes that just take up a large amount of time. In one area in particular that we see as a limiting factor to growth is the AP or accounting teams having an influx of subcontractor pay apps or vendor invoices. So as these companies start to grow, the number of pay apps and the number of invoices continue to increase, and that puts strain on these teams because the traditional process that they're following is heavy on paper, heavy on spreadsheets, and it's a real limiting factor when it comes to scalability. So what we see is this either results in these teams having to bring on additional heads to be able to support these jobs that are being won, or some sort of piece of technology to kind of automate some of these manual processes and reduce some of the paper that's taking up so much of the time from the accounting teams. So those are some of the, I guess, biggest areas that we're seeing in the industry when it comes to bandwidth, Jess.
Got it. And Josh, do you have anything you want to add there?
No, I mean, I think what Ben's talking about really is on point. I mean, the idea, of automation and figuring out ways to maximize outputs without having to necessarily add overhead is really important. Because what you have really are two macro trends in the construction industry, right? You've got profits, going down, but you need more resources as your business grows. So, the idea is anytime you can kind of find that correlation of not having to add overhead to increase resources, or finding ways to add less overhead while increasing resources is really kind of the secret sauce and what you should be thinking about as you grow your business.
Yeah, and not to mention, obviously, recruiting and hiring in construction especially is so challenging. So yeah, I think that was good insight, you guys. Moving on to the next piece, we're going to talk about contract complexities. So Josh is the expert here. Educate us, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is really about my why. So just a quick background on me. I before founded Document Crunch, I've been a construction attorney and an executive in the construction industry for a little bit over the past decade. So I've spent a lot of time, negotiating contracts, but more importantly then working with project teams as they manage the day-to-day issues that arise. So construction's a pretty dynamic industry. And what I mean by that is things happen on a job site every single day. And the things that happen on a job site require management or administration of the contract. And oftentimes what you have is this dynamic where these folks in the back office, like Ben was talking about, maybe the ones who handle the negotiation of the contract, but then you give it to a bunch of people in the field and they're the ones who have to administer that contract. And I will tell you, I've been involved in billions upon billions of dollars in construction projects all across the country. The key correlation, in my opinion, to successful project outcomes is project teams that understand how to administrate the project and how to administrate the contract. Because when things happen, that contract is the way that you keep kind of money from flowing out of your bucket when it doesn't need to flow out of your bucket. So that key correlation is really my why. I found that project teams, and especially when you start to talk about companies that are kind of in these growth modes, project teams are oftentimes extremely intimidated or just don't want to deal in the contract, right? The classic line that you hear from project managers is, we've got a great relationship with this owner, we'll resolve it all at the end. Well, I'm sitting here in Atlanta right now. I know Ben and Jess, you are as well. It was pretty rainy the last few weeks. And I just can't tell you how many millions of dollars seeped right out of the bottom line of projects because project teams weren't giving appropriate notice. They didn't really understand their rights when it rains, et cetera, et cetera. And the whole idea of, we'll just resolve it down the road, we've got a great relationship. What that always adds up to is taking a discount down the road or not getting entitlement down the road as the project's closing out and that owner's or that contractor's holding that 10% retainage, and you've got a $50,000, weather claim, do you walk away from that just to get retainage released? And so I guess going back to this whole macro theory about profits going down, frankly, your business and our projects, they don't have the wiggle room to afford that fee erosion or leakage out of projects, and the lack of wherewithal as it applies to managing the contract directly correlates to that fee leakage. So that's what I think about when I think about contract complexities and how that impacts businesses that are scaling.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful answer. And I think, like you said, a lot of those smaller things, they're hitting these companies down the road. And if you are going through and you are trying to scale, you can't afford to have, multiple small hiccups like that happen over something as simplistic as rain. So I think that was a wonderful example. Ben, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would add is just to kind of follow on with what Josh just said. I mean, I think as your company starts to scale, as you start bringing on bigger contracts, more projects, these what used to be really small issues or small opportunities that you're giving up, they start to compound. And so, if you're talking about, rain delays and you only have a couple days, well, all of a sudden, when you start to scale and you're bringing on more projects, that's tons of dollars that you're just flushing down the drain. And so I just think, just to follow on with what Josh said, is just be aware as you start to scale that these opportunities start to compound and become much bigger. And so it starts to become an area that you should really hone in on and see, what type of dollars are we missing out on? Are we opening up compounded amounts of risk that we weren't previously, just because the contract size was smaller or the number of projects was less. So great stuff from Josh on that.
Yeah, Ben, if you don't mind, I think you actually just brought up a really interesting part of this, and I think it kind of underscores maybe some of the philosophy that I have here. So, you start your company and you kind of own everything, and you're keeping tabs on everything, and you're super, hopefully you're investing time to understand the contract and negotiate it and do all that. But as you scale, to Ben's point, that compounding, issue that he brings up is a good one, because the idea is that it becomes harder and harder. And I've seen this working with large organizations, smaller organizations. It becomes harder and harder to transfer that subject matter expertise or that knowledge as you scale your operations, right? You're leaving people out there on the front lines that are essentially charged with managing your bottom line, that may or may not appreciate things as deeply as you do, or be as aware or educated as you are. And that's the burden that contractors have as they scale. And that's what Ben's talking about. It's not only the likelihood that something's going to go wrong across 5 projects as opposed to 1, it's also the likelihood that not everybody across those 5 projects may have the same expertise or attention to detail or whatever it is that you do. So how do you boon those people out there and give them tools to succeed, notwithstanding that you can't be on every project every day?
Yeah, those are great points. And I love that this is where we ended this one, because it goes into our next topic really nicely, which is lack of process. I think this is probably the most important thing we're going to talk about, because it hits every aspect of the business. I know you guys are going to focus on back office and job site. So I'm going to let Ben start this one, and then Josh, you can pick up as well. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Jess. Yeah, and I think, like Jess said, it's a great follow on to what Josh just said. When you're a small couple man team, you have everything just stored in your head. You're not really documenting your processes. You're not writing down what you're doing. It's just something that it's just what you do at work. And kind of what we see is, as companies start to grow and as they start bringing on more people, more project managers, more accounting staff, all of a sudden it kind of just hits them in the face that they realize that their processes typically are not standardized across the organization or across departments. And I'll talk to people and they'll say, one of my project managers does submittals this way and stores them here, and this other project manager does it this way. And what we see, from an outsider looking in, with lots of exposure to the industry, is without these standardized processes, it's very hard to build a team. It's really hard to replicate what you're doing. And so without standardization, it's also very challenging to find problems in your current process. And without being able to find these issues, it's hard to improve across the board. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have each individual team member continuing to, make mistakes or face challenges or perform processes maybe not as efficiently. But if you're able to find some sort of accepted process across your organization, this will result in your team being able, I think, to, share best practices and lessons learned, rather than everyone just kind of operating in their own little sphere. And I think that's really important. Is one, we have to be able to replicate what we're doing today, and two, we have to be able to improve our processes. Going back to what Josh said earlier, we have to be able to do more with less. Right now hiring is tough, and so you need your project managers, your accounting team to work more effectively. And if you're not able to bring in technology to do that, then you have to be able to improve your processes and share best practices. And I guess kind of my thought also is, processes are, when they're standardized, they're much easier to track from a management perspective. This gives, better insight, and kind of allows the kind of team that's kind of coming in at a 30,000-foot level to see critical items or maybe profitability opportunities that might be slipping through the cracks. So I think it's important that you have something that's reproducible, that can be, allow someone to jump in and see what's going on. And it's not just every single team member is operating in their own little sphere.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, shifting from that mentality of like that paper and, the process in the office to the site. Josh, can you share some on job site process?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very similar point to Ben's, but my thought is that a project team that has a consistent approach, which starts in the back office, but then is transferred to that project team, so that knowledge that we were talking about, or the approach to how to handle certain things, or being consistent in, the way, the tone of communication, et cetera, all of that leads to certainty of results. And it's all about, at the project level, effectuating successful outcomes. So again, I just can't emphasize enough, as much of back office support as construction companies have, where the rubber hits the road and the day-to-day process is at the job site. So when I used to train project teams, I always used to say, like, well, what's our best day in court, right? I'm a lawyer, and that was an easy kind of way for me to phrase it. What's our best day in court? And project managers would look at me like I was crazy. But the best day in court is actually in the project trailer, when that project manager understands what the company's approach is, understands what the company's rights are, understands what's happened on the job site, and can make a persuasive case, if you will, to get what they're entitled to, or to move past whatever it is that's, got them bogged down. Because instead of, having to say, let me go to my back office and kind of be uncertain about this and figure this out, the flip side is, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Owner, this happened. I'm clearly entitled to this per the contract. We've given you appropriate notice per the contract. Stop messing around. Like, just let's move forward. We're entitled to 5 rain days. It rained 5 days. I don't know what else to tell you. That's effectuating successful outcomes at the project level, but it starts with a consistency. It starts in the back office, but it has to be transferred into the field.
Yeah, I think, thinking through also, comparing these two groups of people, because I think there's a level of discomfort with, the back office team thinking through, what does the job site group even want to know? And then, I think vice versa. I think that the communication between those two groups is really complex as well, because they also kind of want to stay in their own lanes to a certain extent, which gets choppy. So that's a tough one. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for going through that. I think, our last slide, and this is probably the biggest one, because it's going to let you guys, take it however you'd like to, and, share what you really want people to know. If you had one takeaway from, like, you're having that conversation with somebody who's ready to scale, they're ready to open up another office, or they're ready to take on, X amount of dollars in new projects or what have you, what's the one thing you would caution them with? What's the biggest thing you want them to think about as they go through that process? Ben, can you start?
Sure. Thanks, Jess. So I think I'm just going to follow up on what I said earlier. I think the most important thing that contractors should focus on when growing is the standardization of their processes. So I was talking to a owner of a growing construction company. They were, in the past 3 years, they've gone from one office to about to open up their fourth. And what he told me is, he said, Ben, the most challenging jump was going from one office to two offices. He said, after we're successful in the second office, the third and fourth have been pretty painless. And what he told me was, look, in the first office, everyone just has all this knowledge just stored in their head. Everyone's just kind of performing their own process, but management's able to actually see what's going on day to day. And he said, look, when we went to go to open this second office, we didn't have a playbook. We didn't have something that we could give someone to reproduce, our Office 2.0, but just in, Charleston, South Carolina, rather than Atlanta, Georgia. And so what he said is, as we went to open that second office, we realized that, okay, we needed to give a playbook to these employees because we weren't going to be there. This wasn't our headquarters. This wasn't our baby. We were going to have to entrust these team members to go out and operate and grow this new location. And I see it all the time. People try to open new locations, and those locations stay small. And I think one of the main reasons that they stay small is that they go off on their own and they operate in their own little operating structure, and they don't follow the best practices that are being shared around the office at HQ. And so I think in order to continue to grow effectively, it's paramount for you to find ways to do more with your existing team. And I think you can work on standardizing and improving processes, but I also will follow on and say, at some point, your processes can be great, but then you start to have to do more with less. And I think the only way to do that at a certain point is through automation and through technology. And so, like, for the most part today, I've tried to really focus on how can we improve what we have today without bringing on more heads or more technology. But I think this is a good point to bring up. Flashtract's main focus is you can improve your processes all day long, but at some point, in order to continue to grow effectively, you need to be able to put in tools that will actually allow your team to do more, process more pay apps, or handle more construction volume, or review more contracts in Josh's case, because at the end of the day, you can have awesome processes, but if you're really going to grow, at some point you need to start leveraging technology so that your teams can work most effectively and most efficiently and focus on value added tasks actually on the job site, and being able to actually execute those new winnings from a back office standpoint. So
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Ben. I think, the playbook bit is really important. That's come up in a couple of the, content pieces we've put together over the past few months, is developing that playbook. We hear it from larger companies all the time. That's like their biggest piece of advice, is consistently check in, consistently set goals for yourself, have that playbook, have that, the thing that can be replicated, whether it's by you or by somebody on your team or somebody, on the other side of the country. That's super important. So yeah, I think that was a good bit. Josh, what would your biggest takeaway be?
Yeah, and I thought Ben made great points. Look, at the end of the day, the construction industry is all about execution. It's all about execution. That's the lifeblood of a profitable construction company. It's a company that executes. And when you're dealing, with a construction business, that really means being in the field and running successful projects. And to run a successful project, we talked a little bit about it. You have to be aware of the contract, not just to, get the entitlements with, like we talked about, but also to know the risks. Construction's a risky business. So there's a lot of risk anyway, just inherently in construction, but how those risks can impact you, that's grounded in the contract. And when you have a disconnect between folks that are making the business decision to take on the projects versus the folks that are executing the project, that's a recipe for disaster, whether you're talking about just that slow fee erosion or just not having wherewithal on how to manage and mitigate risks. So having project teams owning the contracts is really the biggest takeaway. That to me, again, that's been the correlation between the successful contractors that I've seen, whether large or small, and the unsuccessful ones. Having project teams that generally have an acumen as to what this stuff means, what the contract says, and how they manage the project in light of that framework is really the biggest takeaway I can impart. And so to Ben's point, there's a few different ways to do that. The old fashioned way, if we were talking about an industry that perhaps was operating on a much different profit margin, would be, let's just add a bunch of resources, right? Let's hire somebody like me to sit there in-house and read your contracts and tell you everything that's in those contracts, and then go out to the project sites and tell them everything that's in the contracts. You think about how archaic and that really feels in this day and age, because as Ben was talking about, there's technology now that exists to take the pain out of some of these processes, to allow you to get some level of assurance or acumen or wherewithal without spending the traditional time and or money that you would have to do to wrap your arms around that type of an activity. So, the barriers to entry have never been lower. It's time for this industry to figure out a way to scale efficiently. And I believe technology's got a pretty big part in that, path that the industry is now finding itself on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the key themes I think that's been kind of woven through a lot of this is, being prepared, making sure your teams are communicating appropriately. It's all about that communication piece and making sure everybody is up to speed, making sure everybody understands the goal. And whether it's, through contracts or through, the billing processes that aren't going well, or things are off and things aren't able to be replicated. I think that the communication piece seems to be the consistent theme here, which is important. So yeah, I think this was wonderful information. You guys, I appreciate you taking the time to go through it with us. I learned some things today. I'm sure everybody that joined us did as well. If you guys have any questions after we wrap up today, my email's on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll connect you with one of the guys or somebody who can help out with your question. Specifically, we'll be sending a recording of this webinar and also the rundown and some of the key points that we talked about in written format tomorrow afternoon. So be on the watch for that. And again, thank you, presenters. You guys were so helpful. Josh, I'm so glad you could join us. I'm excited to have you be a part of this one. And we will see you guys next time, okay? Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.